Welcome to On the Corner of Main Street, presented by Plaza Hotel and Casino in downtown Las Vegas. Here is Plaza CEO Jonathan Jossel, Gary Vickery, and I'm your host, Lisa Melmed. Howdy, y'all.
Hey, Lise.
How's it going?
Good. How's everybody been?
Doing great. What a week. What a 10 days we've had. What a run this is with rodeo, and I'm looking forward to closing out with a big bang. Well, we opened it with a big bang, but closing out a strong finish next few days as rodeo season, which we dramatically missed last year. At the horse auction, I made a little speech welcoming everyone back to downtown and saying how much we missed the crowds last year. Really, you feel the importance of rodeo when you see what it does for the first 2 weeks of December. And I think our next two guests are going to be really rodeo-centric.
Yes.
Lisa?
Yep.
And,
we are going to go in depth on the rodeo, but
if anybody has any questions or ideas or thoughts they want us to discuss with our guests,
they can email us at podcast@plazahotelcasino.com. Please, with all your questions and anything you want to know about rodeo. Why is it such a big deal here in Las Vegas? What's the deal with rodeo?
Right. I do want to give a quick shout out to Oscars, which is turning 10. Actually this month, but we're going to celebrate on January the 13th. If you're listening, January 13th is a very special day. We're going to have a 10-year anniversary for Oscars. We're going to have a little roast. We're going to have a little dinner series. And we're going to have a very special unveiling that I can't wait to share with everyone what that is about. Not even Rich knows. Not telling you, Rich, because you talk too much to the community.
I am the media.
We also have, in Oscars, our New Year's Eve coming up.
Yes.
And we will be having the only and the biggest fireworks show in downtown Las Vegas.
As always.
7 minutes long.
Wow.
We did a little demonstration of some new fireworks for NFR to welcome the hoedown downtown.
Welcome NFR back.
What do you mean by different fireworks?
It's very technical, Gary, but one is more of like a pyrotechnic, and it's to do with the size of the shells that are exploding and the height that they explode at. I'm no firework expert, but I do love fireworks.
You've been doing fireworks now for the last 5 years. You're a firework expert.
Thank you. So we will be doing bigger shells and bigger heights, all on the South Tower, which is more bang in your boom.
More boom in your bingo.
Have you cut a deal with Derek yet? You're going to get a little taste of what he charges people to be at that lounge at the top of the thing to watch your fireworks?
Well, I haven't, Rich. That's very nice of you to ask that question. I welcome everyone downtown to advertise our fireworks and enjoy it and do whatever they want around it because it's for the whole neighborhood and the community. So I'm happy that they're charging. I'm happy other people do watch parties. Enjoy the fireworks. It's New Year's Eve. And I'm looking forward to it. And also, if you're in town, do not miss December the 30th, Paulie Palooza. I had breakfast with Paulie this morning. Paulie Shore. And he's very excited. Paulie and the Crusties will be doing a concert in the showroom.
And it's a free show.
Well, you need to reserve. You need to RSVP, and you can book tables. But yes, it is free to the public.
How fun.
So don't miss it.
And tickets are available on our website, plazahotelcasino.com.
RSVP is available, yes.
And just so everybody's clear, he's not coming in to do comedy. He's here to do his music.
Which is comical.
Well, yeah.
On the 31st, Brian Christopher of BC Slots is hosting his New Year's Eve bash at in the ballroom. He has a whole fun weekend planned, so definitely check out his website and purchase tickets.
And then we'll be hosting a convention called Zorkfest.
Yes.
Which is, you're kind of the brainchild behind bringing that to the Plaza.
Well, I cannot take any credit for that. They, I don't know how it actually came about. Jonathan emailed and set us all up, and we are so excited to welcome Zorkfest and their attendees to the Plaza. It's going to be a lot of fun, a lot of learning about deals and vouchers and the best discounts. And Gary, you said you could lead a session. Maybe next year.
Yeah, we'll talk about that when we get a little bit closer too. Maybe in a future episode we should, kind of talk about. I know there's a lot of hot button topics with, guests talking about resort fees and different things. There's some of the things that they're going to cover in Zorkfest in their little.
That'll be fun.
And if I want to find out about that, where do I go?
You can go to travelzork.com.
Okay.
All right, so let's get into Oscar's dinner series because boy oh boy, this was an interesting one. in the past, we have played bits and pieces from the Oscars dinner series. We've had Oscar himself come and explain what's going on, but this time we're giving you the full entire Oscars dinner experience from beginning to end, everything but the steak and martinis.
Oh, damn.
So while you're starting to listen to this podcast, if you're at home, grill up a good steak.
Yes.
Get your martini ready.
Yes,
Get
extra
your Bombay on
gin.
fire.
And a little jalapeno twist.
Yes.
Here we go.
Close your eyes. Imagine you're here in the dining room at Oscar Steakhouse overlooking Fremont Street. And here we go.
Welcome, everyone, to Oscar's Dinner Series. I am Jonathan Jossel. I am the CEO here at the Plaza. For those of you that have been with us before, please take a moment to admire the new menus inspired by our regular Joe Asher. You got a lot more information, the subject of the night. Tonight is the last one of the year. So it's been a special year because we discovered we could do these dinner series in the main dining room. This is our 8th one this year. So thank you, Oscar, for your hard work and effort that goes into it. The little cuff. The next time we do one of these, it's actually a special occasion because Oscar's Steakhouse will be turning 10 years old. So thank you. Thank you. One person appreciates the 10 years of history we have here. So we'll be doing a very special event here in January. You'll all hear about it, and we're excited. And I want to take a moment to thank all of our regulars that are here. I already mentioned Mr. Asher over here, but also some of the new people that, if this is your first time, welcome to Oscars. What's up, Q? And also want to mention some special new partners we have here tonight. The gentleman from the Sand Dollar, Tony, Nate. Stand up, gentlemen. We'll be... welcome to the Plaza family. We'll be opening the Sand Dollar downtown, or as the cool kids say, the Dollar downtown. That'll be coming in the first quarter if these guys get their act together, hopefully sooner next year. But thank you, and I want to also mention quickly tonight's sponsors, Frey Ranch and Riboli Family Wines, and our regular friends at Southern Wine and Spirits, Southern Wine and Glazers, Southern Glazer Wine and Spirits. Did I get it? I got it? Anyway, welcome everyone, and thank you, Oscar, for tonight, and I'm sure it's going to be a great story, as always.
Thank you. Thank you, Jonathan. I appreciate it. It's going to be a different kind of story tonight. This is a story that is going to take some time to tell, and we don't have enough time to tell the whole story tonight, so I'm going to do something that we've never done before. I'm going to divide the story into two parts. We're going to have tonight, and then, because everyone's going to like it so much, I'm going to tell Jonathan to give me a raise in order to hear the rest of the story. This is a story of an American tragedy, in effect, and depending on which way you look at it, you'll be able to determine who were the tragic participants. In El Paso, in the 1970s, there was a Wild West situation. There was so much crime taking place down there that nobody wanted to turn any of the alleged criminals in because everybody made their living from the crimes on both sides of the border. So it was rampant as far as smuggling was concerned. And this is the story of a family that really was El Paso. It's a story of the Chagrin family. Now, many of you are not familiar who Jimmy Chagrin was, but around here, Jimmy Chagrin was known as the biggest gambler in the history of Las Vegas. He would go into Caesar's Palace, and he would play $10,000 a hand, $20,000 a hand. He'd come down to Binion's at the Horseshoe. He'd ask for $70,000 a hand, and he was always given the ability to play that kind of money. He had a suite up at Caesar's Palace. He had all of the ladies that he wanted. He had all of the food that he wanted. He was flying private planes around. He was living the life of the very, very rich, but he was living the life of illegality, even though he was telling everybody that he was a gambler, when in fact he was the kingpin of marijuana smugglers. And we start the story with his mother, Josephine Chagra. She was an immigrant from Lebanon who settled in El Paso, and she had 3 sons. It's almost biblical in nature. Her 3 sons, the oldest was Lee Chagra. Lee was the first member of his family who actually went to college, and then he went to law school at the University of Texas and finished in the first 4 of his class. And he was brilliant. He was a great lawyer, and he represented over the years some of the biggest smugglers in that part of the country, in Oklahoma and in Texas, and invariably he won his cases. But when he lost his cases, there was a judge down there by the name of John H. Wood Jr., who was known as Maximum John, who gave all of Lee's clients the maximum that he could give him. And that affected Lee's practice substantially because people don't want to go to a lawyer and have themselves punished as a result of the relationship between the lawyer and the judge. So that was the first character that is part of the story here. And Lee had 2 brothers. He had a younger brother who went to law school, Joe, a very handsome young man, who also went to law school. He wasn't as smart as Lee, but he wasn't involved in any kind of illegal activity. He idolized Lee, and he followed him along the way into the courtroom. And the 2 of them were winning case after case, but when they lost, Judge Wood imposed the maximum upon their clients. And the judge picked the jurisdiction over which he would be able to judge the case. It's very interesting. He took the position that if a plane flew over the Western District of Texas, Midland, Odessa, El Paso, that gave the courts beneath the plane on the ground the jurisdiction to try the case. So whenever there was a giant drug case that was involved where a plane flew over there or activities took place, the judge got the case assigned to his court, and he imposed the maximum when a sentence was imposed after somebody were found guilty. And then there was the middle boy, Jamil Chagra. And Jamil was the apple of his mother Josephine's eye. Jimmy was a fellow who held himself out to his mother as a gambler, a fellow who made a lot of money, and he would take care of his mother and he'd take care of his brother, and he made sure that the whole family who was down there enjoyed themselves and had plenty of money. And he was courted by Caesar's Palace to the extent that when he was involved in a smuggle and he received cash for it, the Caesar's Palace employees and the executives at Caesar's Palace in those days, it was a individually owned casino. It wasn't part of the conglomerates that we have today. They welcomed Jimmy there with all of the trappings of royalty, and they went out and they picked up the Samsonite luggage containers and actually took it into the count room. They weighed the money, and then they washed the money, and then they squoze the water out of it, and they were able to ascertain how many millions of dollars was being brought in to Caesar's Palace, and they welcomed that. They didn't, as they would today, call up the Gaming Control Board and start shaking and saying, the guy's coming here, he's got money, we have to have a suspicious advisement that we have to turn over to the government. It wasn't like that at all. They couldn't get enough of Jimmy's money, and Jimmy couldn't make enough money in order to see that he was the most successful smuggler around. And Jimmy was a tough guy, but in many other ways, he was not a nice man. He took advantage of his wife, Liz, who was a very nice lady, and he had several children with her, and he said that he's the boss, and he was going to do what Jimmy wanted to do. And Jimmy was under the suspicion of the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration, and the ATF, the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Group, and they were suspecting him of what he was actually doing, but nobody was ever able to prove it. But they were all over him, but they weren't able to indict him. They weren't able to get enough evidence against him. And Lee was a little bit jealous of Jimmy. As I say, it's a little biblical here. And Lee wasn't able to make a good living because of the fact that he was in a position that clients didn't want to come to him anymore because they knew if he lost the case, if he didn't win the case, they were going to go away basically forever, and they would go to other lawyers. So Lee got involved a little bit with Jimmy's business, and Lee's practice fell off even more, and poor Joe was trying to hang on to Lee as a lawyer and be loyal to his brother Jimmy, and the family became one in disarray, but the mother, Josephine, she loved them. She loved the boys. She had a daughter, and she loved the daughter, but not like she loved the boys. And there came a time that I was representing some fellas who had contacts down at the Kentucky Derby. And they asked me whether I would like to go to the Derby with them. And I can't remember. I asked Carolyn whether she was able to tell me which of these clients took me down there. Was it Dan Chandler, who was a greeter over at Caesar's Palace and very well known by Mark Davis? And I don't know what you were doing with him, Mark, but if it wasn't you, then it was your dad. But he was a very well-known guy, and I'm not sure whether we were his guests or Billy Walters, who was a very, very big gambler, who was a client of mine. I don't know who asked us down there, but we were very fortunate because I had just won a case for one of Jimmy Chagra's bodyguards. He was charged, the bodyguard was Brad Bryant. He was charged with possession of a 50-millimeter cannon, and he was tried in Lexington, Kentucky. And it was very difficult to win the case because his fingerprints were on the lock. His birthday opened up the lock. His fingerprints were on the cannon, and I don't know what happened, but we went to a jury trial, and the jury came back with a not guilty. So when I went down, this was Happy Chandler's grandson, the commissioner of baseball and the governor of Kentucky, and we went down there and we were greeted at the tarmac by the Kentucky Police Department, and they took us to the hotel and they took us to parties with Phyllis George and with John Y. Brown, who had Kentucky Fried Chicken, and they took us to the ranches and the farms where they would breed the horses. And probably the saddest moment of my life, and I shared it with my wife, was meeting a horse called Pinky. Now, I'm not going to tell you what part of his anatomy caused the name Pinky to be imposed upon him, but I felt so sorry for Pinky because Pinky's job was to get in a stall with a mare and to get the mare excited so a real horse would be able to engage in activity which we will not discuss at a place as legitimate as Oscar's Steakhouse. But I felt so sorry for this poor Pinky. But we, as I said, we had a great time there. And because I had won Brad Bryant's case, I was sort of a celebrity down at the Derby, and we would sit with George Steinbrenner and Representative Gonzalez, and they were very, very kind to us, and they took me to the Colonel Wynn room. This is a room where I think the minimum bet, you know, Joe, what, was it $50 in those days, the minimum bet there, $100? Well, whatever it was, there was a fellow in a white suit, sort of like Mark, a fellow in a white suit with a white cowboy hat, white cowboy shoes, boots, and he had a cane with a silver top to it, and he was up at the counter, and he said, "I want number 7." And the person who wrote the ticket punched number 7. He said, "No, keep going." And this is like about $100 a ticket that he has, and said, "Keep your finger on it," and it was going cha-ching, 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 cha-ching. He changed the odds from a odds-on dog to the absolute favorite, and he looks at me, and he says, "You're that lawyer from Vegas." I said, "Yeah, I'm a lawyer from Vegas." He said, "You're Oscar." I said, "Yep." I said, "Who are you, sir?" He said, "My name is Lee Chagra." He said, "I was going to call you. As a matter of fact, I'm going to call you right after Christmas. I'd like to come out to Las Vegas, and I'd like to discuss a problem that I have here with a judge. There's a judge here who is imposing the maximum sentence on all of my clients, and I want you to file a civil rights suit against him on my behalf." I said, "I really don't do that kind of work, but I'm happy to talk to you about it." And we shook hands, and he went his way, and I went my way. And Lee never made it because 2 days before Christmas, the day of the Sun Bowl of that year, Lee went down to his office in El Paso, and he had just come off a big win in Oklahoma. He came to his office, and he had it all electronically wired. You couldn't get in without combinations. He had cameras. It was far ahead of its time. And he went to the office early in the morning. He told his wife that she should go to the football game with the family without him. And he was in his office, and the doorbell rang. The buzzer went off, and he said, "Who is this?" And they said, "So-and-so." And he didn't recognize the name, but he said, "Okay, I'm going to let you in." And 2 fellas came in there, and they said, "Put your hands up. Open up your safe, or we're going to shoot you." And he opened up his safe, and hundreds of thousands of dollars was taken by them from the safe. And then for no reason whatsoever, they shot Lee, and the bullet went into his aorta, just nicking it. And he fell to the ground, and he died just from this tiny hole in his aorta. He shouldn't have died if anybody came and wanted to give him some help. There was no reason to have killed him. Then they took his boots off, and they took $10,000 from each boot. That's where he used to keep his extra money. And they looked like they were going to get away with murder. And a grand jury met down there about the murder of Lee Chagra. And I got a phone call from Johnny Quinn. And Johnny Quinn was associated with the Raisin Sportsbook at this hotel. And I had represented Johnny Quinn's father-in-law, little giant Maxie Abramson up in Omaha, and I was fortunate enough to have him as a client in that case where I told you about, where I was hired in 19 out of 26 cities, and we discovered the inappropriate authorization. We had all the cases thrown out, and Johnny couldn't think enough of me, and a person who was related to him received a subpoena from that grand jury investigating Lee's murder, and he said, "I'd like to hire you." They called the fellow the missing cowboy, and we went down to El Paso. And as soon as I walked in there, the prosecutor said, "Mr. Goodman, go home. Your client is no longer a suspect in the case." And on the way out, a fellow stops me and he says, "Are you Oscar from Las Vegas?" I said, "Yes." He says, "I'm Jimmy Chagra." I said, "Oh, I'm so sorry to hear about your brother Lee." He said, "Lee spoke so highly of you. I know you were going to help him on a civil rights suit against Judge Wood." He said, "But I have my own problems, and I may be calling you someday because they're investigating me for drugs and importation of drugs, and I'm going to need a lawyer. Can I call you?" I said, "That's what I do for a living," and I handed him my card. And he said, "But before you go, I have a favor that I'd like to ask you." I said, "Anything." He said, he says, "I live in Las Vegas. I bought a beautiful home. It's out in the valley, and it's on Viking Road. It's between Eastern and Pecos. It's a home with a brick facade." And he said, "I'm wondering whether you could look into it because I'd like to buy it for my maid." I said, "I'm happy to do that." I said, "That's my home." I was living across the street from the guy, didn't even know it. He described my home to me. That sort of put me in my place that I was living in the maid's home. But we did not sell the home, but they gave me an idea that this fellow had some money. And Jimmy did not buy my home, but he bought a nice home for his maid, and we became friendly. And then Jimmy was he was being investigated, as I said. He was having a lot of bad luck. His planes were crashing. He had to go down to Colombia. One of the pilots was burned down there. They had to go down with a medevac. Went down with another pilot. They tried to save the guy's life. They couldn't save his life. Jimmy was arrested with the other fellows who went down there, and he was in custody in Colombia. After 6 weeks, he paid a ransom, in effect, got himself released, and came back, and he was back in Las Vegas, and he had used another name. How many people have lived here more than 20 years? Okay, how many people remember Cohen and Kelly's? Nobody, that's amazing. Cohen and Kelly's was a deli in the Valley Bank building at the corner of 4th and, I guess, Carson. It was a place where everybody met after work. The FBI was meeting there. The reputed mobsters were meeting there. The business people were meeting there. And the fellow who owned the place, name was Chris Karamanis. And Chris was a local favorite around here, sort of like Freddie Glusman. Everybody knew who he was, and Chris was friendly with everybody, although Chris was friendly with everybody. Freddie's friendly with nobody. I'm not even going to talk about the kosher chicken at the PROs, but he was you ate kosher chicken last night, I could tell, Jonathan. And Chris had a company called Jet Avia, and Jet Avia had 3 Lear jets, and he also had access to DC planes, big planes, and one of those planes crashed down there, and Chris was involved in arranging the whole thing, and it was obvious anybody who was close to these people knew what was happening, especially when they went down to places like Colombia, and they went to places like Mexico where the activity was taking place, and ultimately, because of financial difficulties, Chris committed suicide down in Mesquite, I believe, and one of our valued citizens got himself involved, and it was like a tar baby. Everybody got stuck there, and I was contacted by Jimmy. He says, it looks like they're going to indict me, and Jimmy got indicted for 2 marijuana counts, which carried 5 years apiece, and 1 cocaine count, which carried 15 years. The 15 years was a mandatory count. And Jimmy said, look, he says, I doubt very much whether I'm going to beat this, but I'll tell you what I'll do. And this is very important with what happens later on. He said, if you could work out a deal for me, and none of my clients wanted deals, because most of my clients, as I've told you before, they didn't offer a deal. It was usually the electric chair or the gas chamber, and that wasn't particularly palatable to the client, so I wasn't used to even talking to prosecutors about deals. He said, if you can get me 2 marijuana counts, even if they run consecutive, that would be 10 years, but they're parolable, whereas the 15-year cocaine count is mandatory, and I would have to do 15 years. So there was a difference, really, of what we were talking about here, of maybe 5 years, and that becomes relevant as to the activities that take place subsequent to that time, because with things that have taken place for the difference of 5 years, the difference of doing a nickel, I don't know, but I don't think so. But the government turned it down. They wouldn't go for that. And then they said, I'm going to teach Goodman and Chagra a real lesson here. They changed the indictment. They went back to the grand jury, and they went after a continuing criminal enterprise where they named Jimmy as the kingpin of this drug operation, and that carried a life sentence. And I knew that if Jimmy were to be found guilty in front of the judge on this particular count, that he was looking at real problems in front of Judge Wood, and he probably would have gotten a life sentence. And the judge set May the 29th as the trial date for the drug case, and it was going to be tried in Austin, Texas. And we went down there to argue motions, and I went to the court to argue some motions. I left court, and I got into a cab that drove me from the airport to the courthouse, and I had a $20 bill. And I said to the cab driver, could you change this? He said, no. I said, well, keep it. He said, no, I'm not going to keep it. Your fare is about $12, and I'll come back for you. I never thought I'd see him again. I said, well, you keep it, and I'll be out of court in about an hour. And he comes out, and as I said, at this point in time, they said, Chagra is a very bad guy. That's all he would say. The word spread through Texas that Chagra was a bad guy, and I felt if the cab driver is saying that, I need a change of venue. I filed for a change of venue. The judge wouldn't give it to us. He wouldn't change the trial date. It was May the 29th. And from the time that I made that court appearance until the time that I went back to Texas, I came out to Las Vegas and I got a phone call from Shaggy. He said, I'd like to go gambling tonight. Let's go down to Binion's. And I said, Jimmy, I got enough vices. I don't want to go down to gamble with you. He says, you'll bring me good luck. So I said, all right, but let's make it fast because I'm tired. I work for a living, Jimmy. And I got to get up in the morning, and you're wearing me out with all these things. And we went down there, and I saw him talking to a fella that I had never seen him talking to before. And he introduces him to me. His name was Charles Harrelson. And Harrelson, I found out later on, was Woody Harrelson's father, Woody Harrelson, the actor. And he said, this is a friend of mine. And I looked at Harrelson, and it was the strangest thing that I'd ever seen. I don't know how to describe it. I've never seen it on somebody else. But you would look at Harrelson, and he had baby blue eyes, but without the little black thing in it. What's that, the iris? What is that, a retina? What is it? A pupil. Is that the pupil? Well, he didn't have a pupil. And it was as though you were looking into his soul, and it was no bargain what you were seeing there. And he just said hello. He was very handsome, not too talkative. And I said, nice meeting you, and went on. And Jimmy gambled. He won $70,000. He gave me $25,000. He said, you brought me good luck. And I drove home, and he drove home, and everything was fine. And then the judge called me, and he said, Mr. Goodman, he said, we're changing the May 29th trial date to a time in June. I said, that's fine with me, Your Honor. I'll be there. I'll tell Mr. Chagra that. And on May the 29th, when there wasn't going to be any trial, Judge John H. Wood Jr. left his apartment, and he went to his car, and he saw that the tires were punctured, and he bent down, looked at them, started to head back to go inside and tell his wife to call the equivalent of 3 A's down there, and a bullet shot hit him in his spine, and it shattered the spine. And when the coroner examined the judge, he said it was a snowflake design that was caused by the shot. And the judge virtually died immediately on the pavement next to his car. And of course, everybody said, well, Chagra probably had something to do with it, but nobody accused him of it. They moved the trial date. Only Chagra knew this. Whoever shot the judge didn't know that the trial wasn't going to start on May the 29th, and we started the trial. And the trial was a tough case because they were trying to show that Chagra was a kingpin. And my defense was that a fellow by the name of Henry Wallace was the kingpin, and Chagra was working for him, and he wasn't working for Chagra. And I had a real shot at winning the case, even though they paraded witness after witness after witness in, because the law is interesting. It's not only an art, but it's a science too. And they were talking in terms of if you have to be a kingpin, then you have to be in charge. If somebody else is in charge, then you're not guilty of the offense that was charged. And I tried the case, and when I went to court, the same cab driver took me to the courthouse. And he said, what are you here for? This is the second time you're down here. He said, I said, I'm here on the Chagra case. He said, the Chagra case? He said, that Chagra, he is a bad, bad man. That Chagra killed Judge Wood, and Judge Wood is the best judge around. He gives everybody the maximum. I love this Judge Wood. You get the maximum if you're found guilty. And the cab driver said to me, and who do you represent? I said, I'm with the FBI. So I was able to get past that, and I tried the case. I was doing fine, and then the phone rang on August the 13th, and it was my darling wife on the phone. I was staying at I think the Hilton Hotel down there in Austin, and she said, Oscar? I said, yes, sweetheart. She said, your dad passed away. I didn't even know my dad was ill, and I love my father more than life itself. He was an idol to me, just the best guy who I've ever met. And I said, oh my God, I don't know what I'm going to do. And I was going to make I was scheduled to make my closing argument. And I figured that that's the only way I could win the case for Chagra, by making the best closing argument of my life. And I tossed and I turned and I cried and I did everything that any one of you would have done if you got the same news, and went into the court at 7 in the morning the next morning. And the judge was William Sessions, who became the head of the FBI at some later point in time. And he was a no good SOB. He was just he was rigid. He was just a bad fella. And he didn't give out sentences the way Judge Wood did, but he was just not a nice person. And I said to him, Judge, I said, my father passed away. He said, oh, I'm sorry to hear that, Mr. Goodman. I said, I won't be able to make my closing argument today. My mind is somewhere else, and this is the most important thing that is taking place in Mr. Chagra's life, and I have to go back to Philadelphia. And I'll come right back, because in the Jewish religion, you're supposed to bury the deceased the next day. And I said, I'm going to take a plane, I'll get back here, and I'll be able to do what I'm supposed to. He said, no, Mr. Goodman. He said, you're a professional. You'll be able to do it. You can make the closing argument to the jury. Well, I made the closing argument. I think I probably spoke for 15 minutes when I ordinarily would have talked for maybe 2 hours. I didn't know where I was. I didn't know what I was saying. I didn't know anything that I should have known if I hadn't had that tragedy happen in my life. And the jury was out for 2 hours, and they found Chagra guilty. And the judge did something that was extraordinary. He must have had a little bit of a guilty conscience. I don't know. He said to Chagra, I'm going to let you stay out for sentencing. Just be back here when the date is set for the sentencing. And Chagra said, all right, I'll be back. And the two of us walked out of the courtroom, and Chagra said, let me get the plane. It's always the same plane that he had me fly around in. Let me get the plane, and I'll have them fly it back to Philadelphia. And went back to Philadelphia and buried my father. And I called Chagra and I said, I'll see you in court for the sentencing. And he said, I'll see you. And I went to court for the sentencing, and there was no Chagra. And deep down inside, I was the happiest guy who ever lived. I was hoping that the Chagra would go out and maybe whack a couple of other people. And I was a happy fella. But Chagra was no genius. Chagra didn't tell anybody where he went, of course, and then had he contact me, I'd have to tell him to turn himself in, and if he did that, he's a bigger dummy than I thought he would be. But that was my duty as a lawyer, and everybody was being wiretapped, and the investigation began, and all that kind of stuff. And Chagra didn't show up. Nobody heard from Chagra. But I found out later on he had gone to Kansas City, Kansas, and he rented a little home, and he had his wife come out there and his children. They changed their names, and all Jimmy wanted to do was have a television. It didn't even have to be a color television. It could be black and white, because he just loved to watch sports. And that's all he would do, and he was a happy guy. He was there watching his sports, and then one day he gets a great idea that he's going to get plastic surgery so he can come back into the world. And he calls up who? A doctor in Las Vegas to get plastic surgery, and made an appointment with him. And of course, the doctor reported it to the authorities, because this was a big news story at the time. And Jimmy came up by himself. He was driving his car, and he was on the Las Vegas Strip, and he sees somebody that he knows. It's one of the police, one of the Metro guys who had been investigating him. And Jimmy says, don't shoot. The guy didn't even know who Jimmy was. Jimmy gets out of the car. He says, "Don't shoot." Jimmy puts his hands up. He says, "I give up." The cop comes up to him. He said, "Who are you?" Shagra said, "I'm Jimmy Shagra. I know you guys are looking for me." And the cop said, "Okay, you're under arrest." And then the cop goes in the back of Shagra's car, and he sees diaper boxes. And Shagra had $840,000 in the boxes. When they did the inventory and it shows up, there was $800,000. And the cop bought himself a home in St. George, Utah. So that gave me a little bit of an idea how the system was working out here as well. And they brought Shagra down, and they indicted him for the assassination of Judge Wood. It was a 4-count indictment: conspiracy to kill the judge, killing the judge, and possession of marijuana for sale, and obstruction of justice, because all of these offenses were picked up on wiretaps when Jimmy was in prison. He was in Leavenworth doing his time, and they had bugs in the table in the visiting rooms, which were put in there not for Shagra, but for another client of mine, Nick Sevilla, who was the head of the Kansas City mob, who, another genius, was trying to get his nephew transferred from one prison to another, and he was going to bribe the warden in order to do this by giving him a diamante. That was tough for them to figure out what he was talking about. And Cinco Grosso, another real tough one. And they picked up Shagra in conversations. And that's what I'm going to tell you about next time. I'm going to tell you about the trial of the century. This was called that by William Webster, the subsequent head of the FBI and of the CIA. It was called that by everybody who talked about the case. It was going to be the trial of the century, and I represented Shagra, and that's our next conversation.
A lot of famous Las Vegans have attended these Oscar dinner series, such as, of course, Mayor Goodman, Billy Gibbons from ZZ Top, Mark Davis,
owner of the Raiders, and you have Scott Robin from Vital Vegas.
Yep. Derek Stevens. So it's pretty much everybody who's a who's been on previous episodes of On the Corner of Main Street. That's it. And we would love to invite you to the next one. Oscar is going to finish his story of Jimmy Shagra. We're going to celebrate Oscar's 10-year anniversary.
Oscar Steakhouse 10-year
Steakhouse 10-year anniversary. It's on January 13th. And we will have the rest of the story here on the podcast. But really, it's a special experience in person. So we definitely invite you to come and check it out and enjoy an Oscar steak while listening to Oscar Goodman, the man himself.
And where on the World Wide Web might I find more information about that?
You can find out on plazahotelcasino.com/Oscars.
We'll be back again soon. But in the meantime, please rate, review, and subscribe. Tell your friends about On the Corner of Main Street. And of course, follow us on social. On Twitter and Instagram, it's @PlazaPod. And on Facebook, find us at Plaza Podcast. Or go right to the top and tweet Jonathan @JonathanJossel. We'll see you next time from right here on the corner of Main Street.